You ever been around someone who just vanished? Not with yelling or a dramatic scene, just disappeared like they were never there. No warnings, no fights, no explanations. At first you're confused, then angry, then desperate for answers that never come. That's the thing about truly dangerous men, the kind who carry storms inside. But don't let them loose. They don't run from conflict. They release it silently. They don't argue chaos. They walk away without warning. I'm talking about the men who don't need to prove their worth with words. The men who know that sometimes the loudest message isn't a shout, it's absence. Today we're diving deep into the signs these men give before they vanish. Because understanding these signs isn't just about spotting danger. It's about learning when to protect yourself, when to listen to silence before it becomes too late. Stick around, and because by the end of this video, you'll see things you never noticed before. And maybe, just maybe, you'll recognize the strength it takes to walk away without a single word. Sign number 1. They've already warned you in silence. Victor always trusted words. He believed if someone had a problem with you, they'd say it. If they respected you, they'd show it. If something was wrong, it would be voiced, reasoned with, or challenged like men once did face to face. But what Victor hadn't yet learned was that evil doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, and sometimes it says nothing at all. It started small, the way his old friend Marcus would go quiet in group conversations. The way he'd avoid eye contact when Victor spoke with conviction. The way he'd chuckle just a little too long when someone else mocked Victor. And yet he never said a thing. Victor ignored it at first. Thought maybe he was imagining things. After all, Marcus had been there during the hard years. They'd built things together, laughed, endured. Surely, silence couldn't mean much. Surely real harm came with confrontation. But Stoicism doesn't ask you to ignore your gut. It asks you to see clearly without passion, without flattery, without fear. And the truth was this. Marcus had already warned him. Not with words, with silence, with absence, with hesitation. There's a moment that still stays with Victor. A cold evening in November. They were at a gathering, old friends, old stories. A stranger brought up a rumor about Victor. Something venomous, false. The kind of slander meant to corrode reputations. Victor scanned the room, not in panic, but in quiet expectation. Surely someone would speak. But Marcus didn't. He didn't defend, didn't intervene, didn't even meet Victor's gaze. Instead, he sipped his drink, tilted his head slightly, and let the moment die in silence. That's when Victor learned something crucial. Those who mean you harm don't always confront you, they just step aside and let the knife be thrown. Their warning isn't always in words. It's in what they withhold. Their loyalty, their voice, their presence when you need them most. In Stoic thought, we are told, don't imagine that someone who seems silent is neutral. Nature abhors a vacuum. In silence, intention grows. The ancients knew this. They knew that evil, when clever, doesn't announce itself. It creates gaps and watches what fills them. Victor would later understand that Marcus was never a friend. He was a mirror for a version of Victor that no longer existed. And instead of growing with him, he grew envious of him, quietly, patiently, and when the opportunity came to stand with him, he chose the safety of the shadows. Silence is a language, one we often ignore because it lacks confrontation. But silence is where some of the worst betrayals live. So now when Victor sees someone withdraw in moments that demand presence, he doesn't chase them. He doesn't explain himself. He doesn't beg. He listens. Because when someone has warned you in silence, they've already made their choice. And a Stoic doesn't wait for louder proof. Sign number 2. They detach emotionally before they physically leave. They don't run, they release. There was no shouting, no slamming doors, no final argument to mark the end. Victor thought there would be. That's how things ended, right? Messy, obvious, undeniable. But real endings, the ones that leave the deepest scars, rarely come like that. He remembers it clearly. She was still there, physically, sitting across from him at the dinner table, responding to questions, smiling at the appropriate moments. But something in her eyes had gone dim, like the last flicker of a candle before it surrenders to the dark. Her name was Elena. They'd weathered so much together, built dreams, survived storms, and yet somehow without a word she was already gone. Not in body, but in spirit. She had detached quietly, carefully, completely. Victor noticed the difference the way a sailor notices. The stillness of wind, not by sound, but by absence. Conversations became polite instead of passionate. Touch became occasional, obligatory. Laughter was replaced by silence that didn't beg to be filled. He tried to fix it, thought maybe she was tired, stressed, distracted, but each effort to draw her near felt like trying to hold water in a clenched fist. The tighter he reached, the more slipped away. That's when he remembered something his grandfather once told him. Some people don't run when they're done. They just release, emotionally, quietly. And by the time you notice, they've already left you 100 times in their heart. And the Stoics, they warned of this too. Epictetus once said, "When someone shows they no longer share your pursuit of virtue or truth, don't cling. They've already departed, honorably or not." Elena didn't leave out of rage. She left out of resolve. And Victor? He was just the last to know. He could have begged, accused, pleaded. But that would have only degraded the dignity of the truth. Her heart had exited the room long before her feet ever would. That's what evil, or at the very least emotional cruelty, sometimes looks like. Not betrayal in the usual sense, but detachment masquerading as patience. A slow fade disguised as stability. And the warning signs were all there. She no longer cared to argue. She stopped asking questions about his day. She said, "I love you," like someone remembering to set the alarm. Automatic, joyless, cold. Victor learned something critical through that silence. People don't always storm out of your life. Some vanish while sitting right beside you. And when they do, the Stoic doesn't chase them. He doesn't bargain for presence that's already been withdrawn. He doesn't confuse physical proximity for emotional connection. Instead, he accepts, with dignity, with clarity, because the wise man understands. When someone detaches before they walk, they are already gone. Sign Thurgra 3, they value inner peace over external explanation. Their silence isn't rudeness, it's discipline. There was a time Victor explained everything. Every misunderstanding, every retreat, every choice that someone took the wrong way. He believed that if people were confused, it was his duty to clear it up, to preserve the peace through constant clarification. But there came a moment, sharp and uninvited, when he realized that not everyone deserves an explanation. It happened after a falling out with someone he once considered a brother. Julian. They'd grown up side by side, endured pain, celebrated small victories, and promised to rise together. But ambition is a double-edged sword, and not everyone swings it with clean hands. Victor began noticing a shift. Backhanded compliments, jokes that carried barbs, subtle undermining disguised as concern. And when Victor finally stepped back quietly without drama, Julian erupted. The accusations came fast. "You've changed. You owe me a conversation." Real men talk things out. But Victor didn't answer. Not because he lacked words, but because he finally understood their weight and their cost. He didn't need to justify his peace. Julian wasn't asking for clarity. He was asking for a crack in the armor, a foothold, a final thread to pull him back into the chaos he'd just escaped. And that's when Victor embraced the discipline of silence. Stoicism teaches to speak only when it improves the silence. Marcus Aurelius, seated atop empires, knew better than most. Not every battle is worth the noise. Not every insult merits a reply. Victor's silence was not passive. It was protective. It wasn't about pride. It was about peace, hard-earned, rarely understood, and constantly under threat from people who feel entitled to your energy. He realized that true strength isn't found in delivering the perfect final word. It's found in not needing to. in walking away not with rage but with serenity. Julian didn't understand. He called Victor cold, said he ghosted him, said he was arrogant, but none of that mattered. Because the man who values inner peace over external approval doesn't speak to be understood, he speaks to be aligned. And if alignment isn't possible, he retreats into silence. Not as a punishment, but as a boundary. Victor learned that some people confuse silence with weakness. They mistake restraint for surrender. But the Stoic knows better. Silence is not avoidance. It is strategy. It is wisdom clothed in stillness. It is the highest form of emotional self-control. So now, when people demand explanations they haven't earned, when chaos knocks and asks for a debate, when betrayal disguises itself as a plea for closure, Victor says nothing. Not out of rudeness, not out of cruelty, but because his peace is no longer up for negotiation. And in a world where everyone wants the last word, the man who walks away quietly often speaks the loudest. Sign number 4. They don't argue with chaos. They don't fight to prove their worth. They walk from disrespect. Victor used to take the bait. Someone would challenge him, insult him, belittle his choices, and he'd respond. Sometimes with logic, sometimes with anger, but always with energy. He thought it meant strength. He thought standing his ground meant staying in the ring, no matter how absurd the fight. But what he didn't realize back then was this. Chaos thrives on attention. It feeds off your need to be understood, to be justified, to be seen as right. And not every fight is about truth. Some are about power, control, ego. He learned this in the most unexpected place, and not a battlefield, but a dinner table. A friend of a friend, someone he'd barely spoken to, began attacking his values. Stoicism, discipline, self-restraint, mocked openly as emotional suppression and toxic pride. Victor could feel the room pause, expecting a response, maybe even hoping for a spectacle. But he didn't give it to them. He sipped his water, smiled faintly, and said nothing. Because Victor no longer argued with chaos. He didn't need to. Disrespect isn't something you fight. It's something you walk away from. The Stoics teach, it is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about them. And the wise man, they say, wastes no energy on correcting the loudness of fools. Victor once made the mistake of believing that silence made him weak, that if he didn't defend his honor, someone else would define it for him. But over time he learned something more powerful. The man who truly knows his worth doesn't need the world to confirm it. He remembers when he confronted this lesson for the last time, during a heated exchange with someone he once dated. She said things designed to cut, brought up his past, doubted his future, accused him of coldness, of arrogance, of being incapable of love. And yet beneath every word was a scream for reaction. But Victor didn't react. He stood still, calm, grounded. Not because her words didn't hurt, but because he knew that chaos always wants company, and joining it would mean betraying himself. So he left. Not as a coward, not in surrender. He left because his presence is not a debate stage for anyone's unhealed wounds. This is what separates the man of emotion from the man of principle. The emotional man needs to win. The principled man knows he doesn't have to play. Now Victor understands. If someone needs to raise their voice to feel power, you disarm them by refusing to speak. You rob chaos of its fuel when you meet it with silence, not fire. Because when your soul is anchored, you don't chase storms, you outlast them. And the man who walks away from disrespect is often the one who never returns to it again. Sign number 5, they live by purpose, not by pleasing. When your presence distracts them from their mission, they cut ties swiftly. Victor used to be available for everyone. A friend needed to vent for the 3rd time that week. He listened. An old acquaintance wanted to catch up and but only to dump chaos into his life. He showed up. Someone misunderstood him and demanded clarification. He explained again and again. He wore his helpfulness like a badge of honor. But underneath it was exhaustion. He wasn't being generous. He was being drained. And then came a season, subtle, but brutal, where Victor started to feel himself slipping. His routines fell apart. His clarity dulled. His goals, once burning bright, now flickered in the shadow of obligations that weren't even his. One night he sat alone in his apartment. Calendar full. Phone buzzing. People asking for things they could do themselves. And the quiet truth rose in him like a blade. You're not living by purpose. You're living to please. It was then he made a decision that would change everything. Anyone who distracted him from his mission had to go. Swiftly. Without apology. There was no announcement. No dramatic speech. No self-righteous post about cutting people off. He just stopped overextending. Stopped replying to emotional leeches. Stopped explaining his silence. And most importantly, he stopped betraying his calling for the comfort of others. The Stoics were clear about this. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. Epictetus. Because when you start choosing purpose over pleasing, you will be misunderstood. Victor experienced that firsthand. Friends accused him of becoming distant. You've changed, they said, as if that was a crime. You don't check in like you used to. You're selfish now. But he didn't argue, because he knew the truth. Purpose costs approval, and pleasing costs your soul, and Victor was no longer willing to pay that second price. There was a woman, Ava, who once lit up his world. Passionate, magnetic, wild. But over time, she became a storm with no center. Her chaos, once charming, began derailing him, pulling him from his path with constant fires to put out. He loved her. But love is not a license to abandon your mission. So one morning, without blame or bitterness, he let her go. Not because she was evil, but because she no longer aligned with where he was going. And a Stoic doesn't keep passengers who slow the ship when it's time to sail. Victor's life changed after that. It became quieter, focused, anchored. Not because the distractions disappeared, but because he stopped letting them in. Now, when someone demands energy that would cost him clarity, when a relationship competes with his discipline instead of complementing it, he doesn't hesitate. He cuts the cord, not cruelly but cleanly. Because Victor lives by purpose now, and those who live by purpose, they don't need permission to protect it. Sign number 6, they don't tolerate repeated disrespect. They believe one betrayal is too many. Victor used to give second chances like candy. He believed in patience, in understanding, in the idea that people make mistakes and deserve the room to grow from them. He'd absorb the blow, chalk it up to stress, to bad timing, to that's just how they are. But over time, something began to rot inside him. It wasn't anger. It wasn't bitterness. It was self-betrayal. Because every time he forgave what was clearly intentional, every time he let someone return without accountability, every time he smoothed over a wound with politeness instead of principle, he wasn't being noble. He was teaching people how to treat him. It came to a head with someone he once trusted, deeply, a business partner named Elias. They had built something from the ground up. Long nights, scarce rewards, mutual grit. But when the money came, so did the shift. Elias started making decisions behind Victor's back, started keeping secrets, started justifying small betrayals with slick words and tired smiles. The first time, Victor confronted it. Elias apologized, swore it was a misunderstanding. The second time, Elias claimed it was just business, nothing personal. By the third betrayal, Victor didn't get angry. He got silent. Because there's a moment every Stoic reaches, a quiet, final line, where they realize, if you allow it again, you've chosen it. The ancients were clear. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." But he also said, "Do not waste what remains of your life in doubt and tolerance of wrong." Victor understood both truths now. He didn't retaliate. He didn't call Elias out in public or curse his name. He simply ended it. Clean, unemotional, final. Not because he stopped caring, but because he started respecting himself more than the comfort of familiarity. Some people will test your boundaries just to see if you have them. They'll apologize not to change them but to reset the cycle. But Victor was done with cycles. Because when someone lies, cheats, belittles, manipulates, and you let them back in, they don't feel grateful. They feel safe. Safe to do it again. Now Victor lives by a simple creed. Disrespect is not a misunderstanding. It's a message. And while forgiveness may be stoic, tolerating patterns is not. You forgive for your peace, but you walk away for your dignity. So today, if someone violates Victor's trust just once, he doesn't overthink. He doesn't demand explanations. He doesn't wait for it to happen a second time just to be sure. Because the man who values his integrity knows this. The first betrayal is the loudest. Everyone after that is just your silence giving permission. Sign number 7, they're masters of control and especially emotional control. Walking away is their way of choosing strength over self-destruction. There was a time when Victor would erupt. Not often, but when the pressure built high enough, he'd snap. A slammed door, a cutting phrase, a decision made in rage that cost him weeks of peace. And afterward, he'd sit in the wreckage, not of what was done to him, but what he did in reaction. It wasn't the world that hurt him most. It was how he handed his power to it. He thought fire made him strong. He thought passion made him right. But all it ever made him was exhausted. That changed the day he watched his own father, a man forged in war and years of silence, walk away from a business deal gone wrong. Victor had gone with him. A contractor had lied. Money lost, time wasted, reputation on the line. Victor expected fireworks. But his father? He said nothing. He stood, shook the man's hand, looked him in the eye, and simply said, "We're done." No threats, no outbursts, just control, absolute, unnerving, dignified control. Victor asked him later why he didn't say more. His father said this: "When you argue with someone who lacks integrity, you borrow their chaos. And when you explode, they win. Control is the highest form of strength." That stayed with him. Now years later, Victor lives by it. There are people who have lied to him, tried to provoke him, tested him. They wanted the old version of Victor, the one who would react, shout, prove himself. But that man is gone. Because the Stoic doesn't lose control. He chooses calm, not because he lacks fire, but because he's mastered when to light it. There was a woman, powerful, beautiful, manipulative. She knew exactly how to trigger him. She'd disappear, then reappear with a sweet smile and sharper words. She thrived on the dance, the fight, the drama. Victor didn't give it to her. One day, in the middle of one of her emotional games, he simply said, "This isn't love. It's war. And I don't fight people I care about." Then he walked away, not with bitterness and with clarity. Because walking away is not weakness. It is refusing to destroy yourself just to prove a point. The man who feels everything, but acts only on what aligns with his values. That's the dangerous man. The disciplined one. The rare one. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Victor found it. Now when insulted, he doesn't respond. When betrayed, he doesn't seek revenge. When disrespected, he doesn't yell. He walks. Because the strongest man in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one who could destroy everything, but chooses not to. Sign number 8. They see attachment as a weakness if it's not mutual. Love must be returned, not begged for. Victor once mistook pain for proof. If it hurt, he believed it mattered. If it was difficult, it must be love. If he was holding on while the other person pulled away, he thought he was being strong. He wore loyalty like armor, even when it became a chain. There was a woman, a Lara, who made him feel like he was both the moon and the tide. Intense, addictive, elusive. She came and went in waves, giving just enough to keep him hoping, but never enough to feel secure. When she was near, she burned bright. When she left in silence, and Victor waited. He justified it as love, told himself that persistence was proof of depth, that one day she'd realize, one day she'd choose him fully. But she didn't. And then one night after she disappeared again, Victor looked in the mirror, truly looked, and saw the truth. He wasn't being patient. He was being afraid. Afraid to lose someone who had already let go. Afraid to admit that unreturned love isn't noble. It's self-neglect. That night he wrote in his journal, "Attachment without reciprocity is spiritual starvation." The Stoics were never soft about this. Epictetus said, "You are not a tree. You are a human being. I do not remain rooted in pain." And Marcus Aurelius, "Do not waste what is left of your life in imaginings of what others think." Victor understood finally that the love that needs to be chased isn't love. It's an illusion wrapped in longing. So he let her go. No angry words, no emotional monologue. He just stopped calling, stopped waiting, stopped assigning value to someone who didn't value him, because the disciplined man doesn't beg for connection. He invites it. And if it isn't returned, he withdraws with grace. Victor no longer sees detachment as cold. He sees it as clarity. It's easy to cling to what once was. Easy to mistake history for destiny. But the Stoic sees through this. Love is not a sacrifice unless it's shared. Now, if someone is inconsistent, uncertain, unavailable, Victor doesn't plead. He doesn't prove. He doesn't perform. He leaves. Because the man who knows his worth does not wait to be chosen. He chooses himself. And in doing so, demands only mutual effort, not mutual damage. There's no resentment in his heart and only realism. He doesn't hate those who failed to love him properly. He simply no longer entertains them, because to him attachment without respect is weakness, and weakness is a luxury the Stoic refuses to carry. So when Victor feels love but senses imbalance, he doesn't force, he doesn't fight. He lets go, not because he's heartless, but because his heart is no longer available for rent. Sign number 9. They trust their gut without needing permission. They don't wait for proof. Intuition is enough. Victor used to override his instincts. He'd feel the shift in energy when someone's words didn't match their eyes. He'd catch the hesitation in a handshake, the flicker in a smile, the pause before an answer. And still he'd stay. Still he'd give the benefit of the doubt. Still he'd wait for proof. Proof they were lying. Proof they were using him. Proof they didn't have his best interest at heart. But by the time proof arrived, and it was always too late, the damage was done. The trust was broken, and the only thing left intact was the voice in his head whispering, "I told you so." Victor once ignored that voice when hiring a new partner. On paper, the man was perfect. Impressive resume, charismatic, said all the right things. But there was something in his presence. A hollowness behind the confidence. Victor couldn't name it, couldn't explain it. So he silenced it. 3 months later, the man vanished, along with funds, sensitive data, and any trace of honor. Victor stood in the aftermath, not surprised, but ashamed, not of the loss, but of his own refusal to trust himself. That was the turning point. He wrote one sentence on a yellow notepad and taped it to his desk. "If I feel it, I trust it. If I sense it, I act. If I know it, I don't wait to prove it." The Stoics teach that we must live in accordance with nature, and what is more natural than our inner signal? That quiet compass inside that doesn't scream, but whispers, "This isn't safe. This isn't real. This doesn't feel right." Victor started honoring that voice. He declined deals that seemed perfect but felt off. He walked away from people who never wronged him, but whose presence stole his peace. He ended conversations mid-sentence, left rooms mid-laugh, and turned down opportunities with a calm "no thank you." Because something in his body said, "This is not yours." People asked him why. He didn't explain. Because the Stoic doesn't need permission to trust his own soul. Marcus Aurelius said, "The inner voice should be the loudest. Trust what your mind and body are telling you when they are in harmony." Victor lives by that now. He doesn't wait to catch someone red-handed. He doesn't ask 5 people for advice. He doesn't journal for weeks trying to figure it out. He listens once. He acts once. and he never looks back. It's not paranoia, it's self-respect. It's not fear, it's precision. Victor doesn't need alarms to know a fire's coming. He can feel the smoke. And because of that, he rarely gets burned anymore. Sign that anchor 10. They understand that the most powerful message is absence. Disappearing is the message. No words can carry it better. There was a time when Victor believed in closure. He believed in giving people explanations. In typing out long text that began with, "Just so you understand." In having one last conversation to clarify what went wrong, even when what went wrong was already crystal clear. But the older he got, the quieter he became, because he realized something that few people are willing to accept. If someone needed your pain explained to understand it, they didn't care in the first place. Victor's turning point came in the middle of a relationship that had grown toxic. Passive aggression, withheld affection, subtle digs dressed as jokes, gaslighting that made him question his memory, his reality, his worth. Every time he tried to explain how it made him feel, the response was always the same. "You're overreacting. That's not what I meant. You're too sensitive." So Victor stayed, thinking if he found the right words, the perfect phrasing, maybe she'd finally understand. But she never did. Because some people don't need more chances. They need to experience your absence. So one day he didn't text back, didn't argue, didn't announce that he was done. He simply vanished like a flame snuffed out in the wind. No speech, no storm, just silence. And that silence said everything. It said, "I'm not here to convince you of my value. I'm not repeating myself to be ignored again. You knew how to treat me, right? You just chose not to." The Stoics knew this. The most powerful force isn't rage and it's restraint. It's the refusal to be baited. The discipline to disengage. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it." Victor lives that now. He doesn't block people out of anger. He simply makes himself unreachable. He doesn't post dramatic quotes. He doesn't air grievances. He just removes his energy from where it's misused. Because the man who disappears without theatrics is often the one who means it most. There's no closure like being met with silence. No explanation more humbling than someone who refuses to give one. No greater shift than realizing the person who always answered no longer does. Victor doesn't disappear to hurt people. He disappears to protect himself. Because absence isn't revenge, it's alignment. When someone lies, disrespects, manipulates, or drains him, and then expects him to stay and explain why that hurts, he doesn't. Because if they were truly worthy of his presence, they would have never made his absence necessary. So now when the line is crossed and when the respect is gone, Victor vanishes. No goodbye, no closure, just space where he used to be. Because silence can't be argued with. And absence? That's the message they never forget. Victor's journey isn't unique. It's the path of anyone who has learned the hard way that evil rarely shouts. It whispers. It lingers in silence, in disrespect, in absence. The signs are there. Not in grand gestures, but in quiet warnings. In emotional withdrawals and broken promises left unspoken. The true strength isn't in fighting every battle or demanding every explanation. It's in recognizing when to walk away, when to protect your peace by cutting what no longer serves you, when to trust yourself more than the chaos around you. Stoicism teaches us that our power lies not in controlling others, but in mastering ourselves and our emotions, our boundaries, our choices. If you've felt this too, if you've seen these signs in someone's eyes or even in your own, remember this. You deserve clarity. You deserve respect. You deserve peace. And sometimes the most courageous act is simply to say enough. To walk away quietly, firmly, without regret. If Victor's story resonates with you, if these signs have opened your eyes, then you're not alone. Here on Stoic Echo, we dive deep into the wisdom of the ancients to help you build that inner fortress, to hear those quiet warnings before it's too late, and to live a life of strength, clarity, and peace. If you want more insight like this, stories that cut through the noise, and tools to live unshakable. Hit subscribe, ring the bell, and join the Stoic Echo family. Because in a world full of chaos and deception, the strongest message we can send is the one Victor learned. Sometimes the greatest power lies in the silence you leave behind. Thank you for listening. Stay strong, stay wise. Until next time, this is Stoic Echo.